Hello and welcome. The minister who signs the trade agreement does not remember the dream from 3 nights ago. The captain of the guard who reassigns patrol routes believes the decision came from his own tactical mind. The merchant prince who suddenly diverts his shipping lanes through Kanathi waters thinks only of profit margins. But you know better. You have seen the pattern, the invisible thread that connects these seemingly random choices across the breadth of Khorvaire. While nations celebrate the fragile peace that followed the last war, while diplomats toast to new alliances in gilded halls, a different war continues in the spaces between heartbeats, in the moment when consciousness surrenders to sleep. This is not a war of armies or banners. This is the war fought in bedchambers and council rooms, in the unguarded mind and the trusting soul. The dreaming dark does not need legions. It has something far more insidious, something that makes conventional warfare seem almost honest by comparison. It has you. It has your neighbor. It has the advisor who whispers in the queen's ear, the scholar who pens the history books, the innkeeper who listens to travelers' tales. The network of agents, possessed vessels, and manipulated pawns stretches across every major city in the 5 nations and beyond. Some of these agents know exactly what they serve. Others have no idea that their thoughts are not entirely their own. And that is precisely what makes this shadow war so terrifyingly effective. Consider Sharn, the city of towers, where nearly 200,000 souls live stacked upon one another in impossible vertical neighborhoods. Among those masses, how many serve the dreaming dark? The question itself is designed to create paranoia, and paranoia serves their purposes well. Based on what we know of the organization's scope and methods, the network likely runs into the thousands when you count every level of involvement. At the apex sit the inspired themselves, those whose bodies house quarry spirits fully and permanently. These are the rarest, the most valuable pieces on the board. An inspired can maintain their position for years, even decades, slowly climbing through social hierarchies or maintaining crucial positions of influence. In Sharn alone, scholars who study the dreaming dark's operations suggest at least a dozen to perhaps 20 inspired could operate at any given time, though exact numbers remain impossible to verify. You might pass one on the skybridge between Dura and Menthais, a merchant dealing in dreamlily and other substances that alter consciousness. You might petition one in the halls of Morgrave University, where they masquerade as a professor of ancient history, subtly altering the academic understanding of the Age of Giants. One could sit on the Sharn City Council itself, voting on laws and ordinances that shape the lives of all who dwell in the towers. They do not announce themselves. They do not gather openly. The dreaming dark operates on a need-to-know basis, and individual cells remain isolated to prevent any single capture from unraveling the entire web. But the inspired are merely the anchors of this network. Beneath them, The dreaming dark employs various categories of agents with different levels of awareness and control. In Redru itself, the term chosen refers specifically to humans who have been bred and trained to serve as vessels for quarry possession, unpossessed administrators who manage much of the Empire's daily functions. But in Khorvaire, where the dreaming dark operates covertly, we can infer they must use different methods to create agents who retain their original identities while serving quarry interests. These individuals, touched by quarry but not fully possessed, could retain their own consciousness, their own memories and personalities, but with subtle alterations. Perhaps during a period of extended sleep, a quarry spirit works its way into their dreams night after night, slowly reshaping neural pathways, implanting suggestions that feel like organic thoughts. Such an agent would believe they act of their own free will. A captain in the Brelish military might suddenly develop a tactical preference for defensive positions over offensive strikes, prolonging conflicts rather than seeking swift victory. He would think this wisdom came from experience. A judge in the Ondarian courts might begin showing leniency towards certain types of criminals while being harsh with others, subtly tilting the scales of justice in ways that serve the dreaming dark's broader agenda. She would believe she is being fair. The beauty of such manipulated agents, from the dreaming dark's perspective, lies in their authenticity. They pass every test, every magical scrutiny, because they genuinely believe in what they do. When questioned under truth-compelling magic, they speak honestly about their motivations. The manipulation runs so deep that it has become indistinguishable from genuine belief. This makes them nearly impossible to identify without incredibly specific knowledge of quarry manipulation techniques, knowledge that very few possess. Then we must consider sleeper agents, individuals who have been programmed with specific triggers. Based on the dreaming dark's known capabilities with dream manipulation, such programming would be entirely consistent with their methods. A sleeper might live their entire life without ever activating. A normal citizen of Rote or Flamekeep or Vedikar. But when the activation occurs, when they hear the right combination of words or see a specific symbol, their programming could take over. They might commit an assassination and have no memory of it afterward. They might deliver a message to a contact they have never met. They might simply be in the right place at the right time to provide a crucial piece of information. The creation of such sleepers would require significant effort, but the dreaming dark has had decades to build this network. During the last war, when refugees fled from nation to nation, when orphans filled the streets of every major city, when trauma and displacement created populations desperate for help and comfort, opportunities for recruitment would have been abundant. If Redran aid workers, supposedly neutral humanitarian missions, established orphanages and healing houses across Khorvaire. And we know they did maintain such presence. The children who passed through these institutions might have left with more than just physical healing. Consider the case of someone like a young clerk in the Brelish Parliament's Records Department. If she had been a war orphan taken in by such an aid mission 18 years ago, she might remember her time there fondly. The workers were kind, the food was adequate, and she learned to read and write, skills that allowed her to secure her current position. But what if there were dream sessions she does not remember? Nights when quarry spirits gently probed her sleeping mind. Now she files documents and maintains records, a trusted civil servant with security clearance. This scenario suggests how twice in the past 5 years she might have misfiled specific documents, making them nearly impossible to locate when needed. Both times involving intelligence reports about Redran ship movements. She would have no idea why she made these errors. They would trouble her, these uncharacteristic mistakes, but perhaps not enough to mention them to anyone. The geographic spread of this network staggers the imagination. In Thrain, where the Church of the Silver Flame maintains spiritual vigilance, the dreaming dark would certainly attempt infiltration, though the church's protections make this challenging. High-ranking clergy who serve the dreaming dark in some capacity would need to be carefully cultivated. An inspired bishop who had held his position for decades could slowly steer church policy toward isolation and internal focus rather than external threats. Others might be agents who genuinely believe their visions come from the silver flame when they actually originate from quarry manipulation. The evidence suggests such infiltration is not only possible, but likely, given the organization's priorities. In Canath, the network would take on a different character. The undead armies and the nation's historical connection to necromancy create unique challenges for quarry infiltration, as undead do not dream, and therefore cannot be possessed through traditional means. But the living commanders, the officers who direct those undead forces, they very much do dream. The dreaming dark would logically focus its efforts on military leadership in Canath, creating a web of influenced agents among the general staff. These officers would believe they serve Canath's interests, and in many ways they would. But their strategic decisions might also serve to keep Canath focused inward, dealing with internal power struggles rather than becoming a unified threat to Redran interests. The merchant houses provide another layer of infiltration. House Lyrandar, with its control of weather magic and shipping routes, represents a priority target. Inspired operatives within the house's upper echelons, holding positions that allow them to influence trade routes and weather patterns, could ensure that certain shipments from Redra receive favorable treatment. That specific cargo never gets inspected too closely. House Orion's transportation network makes it invaluable for moving agents and information. Regional management positions would give access to travel manifests and the ability to arrange coincidental meetings between operatives. But the Dreaming Dark's true genius lies not in its high-level agents, but in the countless ordinary people who serve without knowing. The barkeep in a Sharn tavern who repeats interesting conversations to a regular customer, who asks such innocent questions. The scribe in a Fairhaven library who mentions which nobles have been researching certain topics. The porter in a Flamekeep inn who remembers which rooms guests stayed in and what condition they left them in. None of these people need to be possessed, controlled, or magically compelled. They could simply be doing favors for friendly acquaintances, earning a few extra silver pieces, or satisfying their own curiosity. They would have no idea that the information flows upward through carefully constructed networks until it reaches quarry analysts in Redra. The network likely extends into criminal organizations as well. The Boromir clan in Sharn, for instance, may have unknowingly employed several dreaming dark agents over the years. These agents would not rise to leadership. They would not seek to control the organization. They would simply exist within it, observing and occasionally steering events in subtle ways. When the clan plans a major heist, an agent might suggest a slight change in timing that happens to coincide with a guard shift that serves the dreaming dark's purposes. When the clan moves into a new territory, an agent might recommend a location that happens to disrupt a rival organization that has been causing problems for Redran operations. The intelligence gathered through this network flows back to Redra through multiple channels. Some information travels via legitimate diplomatic correspondence, encoded in seemingly innocuous trade reports and cultural exchange summaries. Other data moves through magical means, dream sendings that transfer vast amounts of information directly from agent to handler while both sleep. Still more intelligence physically travels with merchants and travelers who have no idea they carry encoded messages in the patterns of their cargo or the specific arrangement of goods in their packs. What makes this network nearly impossible to dismantle is its redundancy and compartmentalization. If one agent is discovered and eliminated, 3 others in the same city would have no idea that agent even existed. If an entire cell is exposed, the surrounding cells continue operating without interruption. The dreaming dark has spent over 1,500 years perfecting these techniques in Sarlona. The network in Khorvaire, while only a few decades old in its current form, benefits from that accumulated expertise. The last war provided perfect conditions for expansion. Nations desperate for intelligence recruited agents with minimal vetting. Displaced populations moved freely across borders. The chaos of warfare made it nearly impossible to track who was where or why. During those 100 years of conflict, the dreaming dark would have planted agents like seeds across a field. And now, those seeds have grown into a forest that blocks out the sun. In Ondare, the network would logically focus heavily on academic and magical institutions. Arcanix, the premier magical academy, represents a high-value target, graduate students who studied there for several years, could have returned to their home nations with subtle programming. Professors who believed they were conducting legitimate research might have actually worked on projects that served the Dreaming Dark's understanding of planar mechanics and dream manipulation. The Royal Collection of Ondair, a vast library in Fairhaven, could employ agents who have spent years subtly altering historical records related to the Age of Giants and the properties of Dal Quor. Sire's destruction actually would have benefited the Dreaming Dark's operations significantly. Assuming they were not responsible for the morning itself, which remains unknown, the millions of refugees created new opportunities for recruitment and infiltration. Siren survivors, traumatized and displaced, would prove particularly vulnerable to quarry manipulation. Many genuinely wanted to help their people and could be easily convinced that cooperating with certain groups would lead to better outcomes for refugees. These well-meaning individuals might have become unwitting informants, reporting on the activities and locations of other Sirens. Information that the Dreaming Dark uses to identify potential threats and recruit additional agents from the vulnerable population. The network also extends into unexpected places. New Sire, the refugee settlement in Breland, could harbor sleepers among its population. None may have activated yet, but they would stand ready. The monstrous tribes of Droam, often dismissed as irrelevant to international politics, may have been contacted by Dreaming Dark agents who recognize that chaos serves their purposes. While Droam's population cannot be possessed in the traditional sense, they can be manipulated through promises of recognition and power. Even the dragon-marked houses, with all their wealth and magical resources, have not proven immune. Each house likely has at least one compromised member, usually in a position that provides access to information rather than direct power. The Dreaming Dark learned long ago that obvious positions of authority draw scrutiny, while those who process information, who maintain records and coordinate logistics, often work in the shadows where oversight is minimal. The truly terrifying aspect of this network is its patience. The Dreaming Dark does not expect immediate returns on its investments. An agent might operate for 20 years without ever being called upon to act, but when the moment comes, when that specific piece of information is needed, or that particular action must be taken, the agent is ready. This long-term perspective makes traditional counterintelligence almost useless. How do you identify a threat that has done nothing threatening? How do you justify removing someone from their position when they have served faithfully for decades? You walk the streets of any major city in Khorvaire, and you pass them. The agent standing at the street corner selling newspapers. The bureaucrat filing requisition forms in a government office. The dock worker loading crates onto ships. The servant bringing wine to the noble's table. Any of them could be manipulated agents, sleepers, or unknowing pawns. Any of them could be the one who, at the crucial moment, provides the piece of information, or performs the action that advances the Dreaming Dark's agenda one more step forward. And the most effective part of this entire system, the paranoia it creates when exposed. When people learn that the Dreaming Dark has agents everywhere, they begin to suspect everyone. Trust breaks down. Allies question each other. Governments become paralyzed by fear that their own officials might be compromised. This paranoia serves the Dreaming Dark's purposes as effectively as the actual network of agents. After all, a divided Khorvaire, a suspicious and fearful population, is far easier to control than a united one. Section 2. The Last War as Distraction. The war began in 894 year of the kingdom, when King Geralt of Galifard died, and his children could not agree on succession. Or at least, that is what the history books tell you. That is what the chroniclers recorded, what the bards sing, what every child learns when they study the great tragedy that shattered the golden age of unity. But you have begun to see the pattern, and now you must ask yourself a more difficult question. Did the Dreaming Dark cause the last war? And the answer, based on what we know of their capabilities and goals, is both simpler and more complex than a simple yes or no. They did not create the conflict from nothing. The seeds of division existed already, planted by human ambition, and the inherent instability of deciding succession among 5 powerful heirs. But what the Dreaming Dark could have done, with patient and methodical precision, was ensure that those seeds grew into a forest of violence that lasted for over a century. Consider the mathematics of war. When conflict begins between nations, several factors determine its duration. The availability of resources, the willingness of populations to continue fighting, the diplomatic options for peace, the exhaustion of military forces, and the presence or absence of outside mediators who can broker truces. In a typical continental war, even one involving multiple great powers, these factors usually force resolution within 10 to 30 years. Populations tire of casualties. Economies collapse under military spending. Resources become depleted. Leaders die and are replaced by those more amenable to peace. Yet the last war continued for 102 years, consuming multiple generations, devastating entire regions, and fundamentally reshaping the political landscape of Khorvaire. While many factors contributed to this extended duration, the possibility of external manipulation cannot be dismissed. Given what we know of the Dreaming Dark's presence in the region, the Dreaming Dark did not need to start the war. They only needed to keep it going, and they had every reason to do exactly that. A united Khorvaire, a continent-spanning empire with the resources and knowledge of all 5 nations working in concert, would eventually turn its attention outward. United nations build navies, sponsor expeditions, and develop the military and magical capacity to threaten foreign powers. Galifard, at its height, possessed exactly this kind of unified strength. The dragon-marked houses, the magical academies, the military traditions. All of these working together created a civilization that could potentially challenge Ridra's dominance in Sarlona. Or, far worse from the Dreaming Dark's perspective, develop the capability to force contact between planes, to bring Dal Khorvaire into alignment with the material world. So the war would have needed to continue. Not forever, nothing lasts forever, but long enough to drain resources, destroy knowledge, fracture alliances, and create generations of people who knew nothing but conflict, long enough that when peace finally came, it would be fragile, tentative, and built on resentment rather than cooperation. The Dreaming Dark understood something that many military commanders never grasp. You do not need to win every battle to win a war. Sometimes, you merely need to ensure that no one else wins either. If the Dreaming Dark had agents in place before 894 year of the kingdom, and given their long-term operational methods, this seems likely, manipulations could have begun subtly in the years leading up to the succession crisis. As King Geralt aged and the question of succession loomed, agents would have worked to amplify existing tensions. An inspired noble in the Ondarian court could have whispered doubts about Miss Hand's capability to rule, not loudly, never obviously, but in quiet conversations with influential courtiers. An agent advising Roan in Breland might have helped craft speeches that emphasized Brelish exceptionalism and questioned why they should bow to any throne but their own. In Canath, sleeper agents could have ensured that military leaders heard every slight, real or imagined, from the other heirs. When Geralt finally died, if pieces were already in position, compromise might have been prevented. History records several moments in those early months when negotiations seemed possible, when cooler heads nearly prevailed, but at each crucial juncture, something went wrong. This pattern could suggest external interference, though proving such interference remains impossible without access to Dreaming Dark records. A messenger carrying peace terms killed by bandits, diplomatic summits collapsing due to supposed intelligence leaks. These incidents align with the kind of subtle sabotage the organization is known to employ. As the war escalated from border skirmishes to full continental conflict, the Dreaming Dark strategy, if they were involved, would have evolved accordingly. They would not need to control the war, merely influence it at key moments. When peace negotiations began, and they began many times over that 100-year span, agents would have worked to sabotage them. Sometimes, this could have meant assassination, a diplomat working toward reconciliation between Ondare and Thrain dying in his sleep. A heart attack, the physicians would say, though we know quarry spirits can stop hearts during dreams. Sometimes, it might have meant timing, a crucial meeting scheduled for a specific date suddenly facing complications, when weather magic created unseasonable storms that delayed travel. By the time the delegates arrived, the political situation would have shifted, and the moment for peace would have passed. The Dreaming Dark also would have recognized that war requires fuel, and they helped provide it through Redran merchants. These merchants sold weapons and supplies to all sides, never enough to give any nation a decisive advantage, but always enough to keep the fighting going. These merchants presented themselves as neutral profiteers, which was true enough, but their profits served a higher purpose. The gold that flowed to Redra funded more agents, more operations, more interference. It would have been a perfect feedback loop. The war created demand for resources. Redra supplied those resources, and the profits allowed them to ensure the war continued. But perhaps the most insidious manipulation, if it occurred, would have come in the form of hope. The Dreaming Dark understood that populations will only support war for so long unless they believe victory is achievable. So agents could have worked to maintain that belief in all 5 nations simultaneously. Propaganda, spread through newspapers and broadsheets, would emphasize victories while downplaying defeats. Influenced officials in military command might occasionally achieve genuine tactical successes that could be celebrated and used to justify continued fighting. The message would remain constant across all nations, tailored to each culture, but fundamentally the same. We are winning. One more campaign, one more season, one more year, and our enemies will break. Just hold on a little longer. This manufactured hope, if it existed, would have proved devastatingly effective. In Khorvaire, the population endured decades of war, believing that their superior magical capabilities would eventually overwhelm their enemies. In Khanath, citizens accepted increasingly harsh measures because their undead armies made victory inevitable. Brelin's democratic traditions created a population that believed they fought for principles worth any sacrifice. Thrain's connection to the Silver Flame convinced them that divine favor assured their triumph. And Sire, beautiful tragic Sire, believed until the very end that the other nations would recognize their legitimate claim to the throne and sue for peace. The Dreaming Dark's agents would also have worked to prevent any single nation from achieving dominant victory, maintaining the balance of power that prolonged conflict. When one nation threatened to overwhelm another, subtle logistical problems might slow advances just enough for the defender to stabilize their lines. When superior industrial capacity threatened to produce overwhelming advantage, key resources could become suddenly scarce or prohibitively expensive. The goal would be never to favor any particular nation, but to maintain rough equilibrium, to keep the war grinding forward with neither decisive victory nor complete stalemate. The intelligence networks that each nation built during the war would have served the Dreaming Dark's purposes beautifully, assuming they achieved infiltration. The trust in Zilargo, originally created to protect gnomish interests, the royal eyes of Khorvaire, Brelin's king's citadel, Thrain's Templars, Khanath's military intelligence, all of them developed extensive spy networks that the Dreaming Dark could parasitize. An inspired agent in one nation's intelligence service could feed information to their handlers, while simultaneously feeding disinformation to their own nation's enemies, creating a hall of mirrors where no one could be certain what intelligence was accurate. The war also provided perfect cover for more direct operations. Assassination programs that would have been scandalous in peacetime became routine wartime operations when a researcher at Morgrave University, who was getting too close to understanding the true nature of Dal Quor, died in an air raid on Sharn. No one would question it. War created countless random deaths when a Syrian general who had been coordinating a major offensive suddenly began making inexplicable tactical errors after a period of stress-induced insomnia. His superiors would attribute it to exhaustion rather than quarry possession during those sleepless nights when his mental defenses were weakest. The destruction of Sire in 994 Dale Reckoning remains one of the greatest mysteries of the age, and speculation about the Dreaming Dark's involvement refuses to die. Did they cause the mourning? Almost certainly not, based on available evidence. The magical catastrophe that created the Mournland exceeded even quarry capabilities, and all indications suggest they were as surprised as everyone else. But did they benefit from it? Absolutely. The shock of Sire's destruction finally forced the remaining nations to accept peace, but it was a peace built on trauma and fear rather than genuine reconciliation. The Treaty of Thronehold that followed created a fragile balance of power where no nation could trust any other, where old grudges festered beneath diplomatic niceties, where the threat of renewed war remained always present. This would have been exactly what the Dreaming Dark needed. A divided Khorvaire, nations that watched each other more than they watched external threats, populations exhausted and focused on recovery rather than expansion. The years since the treaty have seen nations turn inward, dealing with economic collapse, refugee crises, and the psychological trauma of generations raised in war. This inward focus serves Ridra's interests perfectly, while Khorvaire rebuilds. While it struggles with internal problems, Ridra continues its own agenda unopposed. The Dreaming Dark also would have benefited from the long-term effects of the war on institutional knowledge. Libraries burned, universities closed, scholars died, and apprentices never learned from masters who perished in battle. The accumulated wisdom of Galifar, carefully preserved and expanded over 1,000 years, suffered catastrophic losses. Magical research that might have eventually posed threats to Ridra was destroyed or abandoned. Military traditions that taught strategic thinking and long-term planning gave way to the brutal pragmatism of survival. An entire generation grew up knowing only war, and now they must somehow build peace without the diplomatic and cultural tools their ancestors possessed. Consider also the economic devastation. War is expensive, ruinously so, and every nation spent beyond its means for over a century. When peace came, it found treasuries empty, infrastructure destroyed, and populations that had been taxed to the breaking point. This economic weakness serves the dreaming dark well, if that is indeed their goal. Impoverished nations cannot fund major military expeditions. They cannot sponsor the kind of magical research and development that might eventually threaten Ridra. They must focus on immediate survival rather than long-term threats. The dragon-marked houses, enriched by war profiteering, now hold disproportionate power over economically weakened governments. And the dreaming dark has been carefully cultivating agents within those houses for decades. The psychological impact of the war cannot be overstated. An entire civilization developed trauma responses that will echo for generations. Trust became a liability when anyone might be an enemy spy. Cooperation across national lines became treason. The grand vision of a united humanity working together, the dream that built Galifar, shattered into suspicious nationalism. This breakdown of trust serves the dreaming dark's purposes magnificently. Assuming manipulation was their intent. A population that cannot trust its neighbors will not unite against external threats. A civilization that fears itself cannot develop the collective will necessary to challenge Ridra's power. The refugee populations created by the war also serve ongoing operations. Millions of displaced people, separated from their traditional communities and support structures, represent ideal recruitment opportunities. A Syrian orphan who watched her parents die in the war, who lived in camps for years, who knows nothing but loss and displacement. Such a person becomes vulnerable to anyone offering purpose and belonging. Based on their known methods, the dreaming dark has likely spent the years since the treaty identifying and cultivating these vulnerable individuals, building networks among refugee populations that can be activated when needed. The last war accomplished something else that would have served the dreaming dark's ultimate goals if they influenced its duration. It demonstrated to all of Khorvaire that large-scale conflict leads only to destruction. When people discuss the possibility of another war, they reference the mourning, the millions dead, the century of suffering. This creates a powerful psychological barrier against the kind of unified military action that might eventually be necessary to confront Ridra. If Khorvaire ever discovered the true extent of the dreaming dark's infiltration, the appropriate response would be immediate, unified military action against Ridra. But the trauma of the last war makes such a response almost psychologically impossible for the current generation to contemplate. They would rather ignore the threat than face another century of war. The war also served to identify and eliminate potential threats, though whether deliberately or through the natural attrition of conflict remains unclear. Brilliant military commanders, innovative magical researchers, charismatic leaders who might have united populations against external enemies. Many of them died in the war. If the dreaming dark was active, they would not need to assassinate all of them directly. They might merely ensure that such individuals found themselves in dangerous situations. A talented young general receives orders to lead a charge into a well-fortified position. A researcher whose work was approaching dangerous territory gets drafted into military service despite academic exemptions. The war consumed the best and brightest of an entire civilization, and their loss creates a leadership vacuum that external forces could exploit. Now, in the fragile peace that followed Thronehold, the nations of Khorvaire face their greatest challenge. They must rebuild while surrounded by former enemies, restore trust while potentially infiltrated by agents, and prepare for future threats while exhausted by past conflicts. And through it all, the shadow war continues, if it exists as suspected. The dreaming dark does not need another last war. Not yet. Not for decades, or even centuries if they can help it. What they would need is for Khorvaire to remain exactly as it is now, divided, weakened, suspicious, and turned inward. And every day that this situation continues, every year that passes without unified action against Ridra, represents another victory in their patient, methodical campaign to control the future of Eberron. Section 3. Assassination through dreams. The body lies peaceful in the bed, eyes closed, expression serene. There are no wounds, no signs of struggle, no evidence of poison or violence. The healer examines the corpse and finds nothing unusual. Heart failure, perhaps, or a stroke. These things happen, especially to people under stress, and who in Khorvaire has not lived under stress for the past century? The family grieves, the funeral proceeds, and within a week, the death becomes just another statistic in a world already drowning in mortality. But you know what the healers do not. You understand that this person might not have died of natural causes. They could have been murdered in their sleep by something that left no trace, no evidence, no way for the living to seek justice, or even confirm that a crime occurred. The Quarry have perfected the art of manipulating dreams over millennia of practice in Sarlona. When your consciousness exists primarily in the dream realm, when you can move through sleeping minds as easily as you walk through a physical room, influencing mortal consciousness becomes a matter of technical precision rather than physical violence. The techniques would vary depending on the target, the urgency of the elimination, and the desired appearance of death. But they would all share one characteristic. They would be completely untraceable by conventional methods. Based on what we know of Quarry capabilities, the simplest method would involve physiological manipulation during sleep. When you sleep, your body enters states of reduced awareness and control. The autonomic nervous system continues functioning, of course, keeping your heart beating and your lungs breathing. But the conscious mind that might recognize something wrong and wake you has withdrawn. A Quarry spirit entering through your dreams could potentially interface directly with your unconscious processes, sending signals that disrupt the electrical rhythm that keeps your heart beating steadily. From the outside, this would look exactly like natural heart failure. The challenge in understanding these methods is that magical examination finds no poison, no curse, no external force that caused the death. Because technically, the victim's own heart failed them, without understanding that a quarry spirit might have triggered the failure from within the dream. There would be no way to prove otherwise. Even speak with dead spells would yield limited information, because the victim never knew they were being attacked. They simply went to sleep and never woke up. You might be wondering how you defend against such a threat. The answer is both simple and terrifying. You cannot, not really, not unless you know the danger exists and take specific precautions. Most people in Khorvaire have no idea that dream assassination is even possible. They understand that quarry exist vaguely as creatures from Dal Khor. They might have heard stories about Ridra and the Inspired, but the specific mechanics of how quarry operate, the technical capabilities they possess, this knowledge remains rare and closely guarded. A second method, based on quarry capabilities, could involve inducing catastrophic neurological failure. Your brain, during sleep, cycles through different states. During certain phases, particularly deep sleep, the conscious mind essentially shuts down while the brain performs maintenance functions, consolidating memories and processing information from the day. A quarry entering during this vulnerable phase might overload neural pathways, creating cascading failures that result in massive strokes or aneurysms. The victim would die instantly, still sleeping, never aware that anything was wrong. This method would require more skill and carry more risk for the quarry, as the intimate contact with a dying brain could be traumatic even for them. But it offers advantages. Strokes and aneurysms occur in younger, healthier individuals more believably than heart failure, making them ideal for targets who would not credibly die from cardiac issues. A 30-year-old military officer in excellent physical condition dying of heart failure raises questions. The same officer dying from an aneurysm, while tragic, seems like terrible luck rather than murder. The third method would involve psychological destruction rather than direct physical damage. This takes longer, sometimes weeks or months, but creates the most plausible deniability. A quarry repeatedly entering a target's dreams night after night, not to kill directly, but to induce severe psychological stress through nightmares so vivid, so traumatic, that the victim begins to fear sleep itself. Insomnia develops, and with it comes all the medical complications of chronic sleep deprivation. The immune system weakens, cognitive function declines, the body begins to break down. Eventually, through sheer exhaustion and accumulated damage, the target dies. Or more commonly, they would break psychologically before physical death occurs. Severe insomnia leads to hallucinations, paranoia, erratic behavior. a once stable individual begins acting irrationally, making mistakes, alienating allies. Even if they survive physically, they are destroyed as an effective threat. And the entire decline looks like mental illness or stress-induced breakdown, something that happens to people all the time, especially in the aftermath of a century of war. Consider scenarios like a general who commanded forces along a national border and had begun to notice patterns in enemy troop movements that suggested intelligence leaks in their command structure. If such a person started investigating, asking uncomfortable questions, looking into the backgrounds of staff officers, they could become a target. Based on known dreaming dark methods, within weeks of beginning such an investigation, nightmares might begin. At first, they would seem related to war stress, dreams of battles, of soldiers dying under command, normal enough for a military officer. But the nightmares could intensify. Dreams of family being tortured, of betrayal by closest advisors, of monstrous shapes that hunt through endless dark corridors. Sleep would become impossible beyond a few hours a night. Staff would notice the deteriorating condition, the bags under eyes, the tremor in hands. Suggestions to take leave, to rest and recover, might be refused as the investigation seemed close to discovering something important about the intelligence leaks. Within weeks after the nightmares began, such a general might be found dead in their quarters. Heart failure, the healers would declare. The stress of command, the lack of sleep, the accumulated strain of decades of war, the investigation would die with them. Files mysteriously disappearing from the office before anyone else could review them. The intelligence leaks would continue unabated, and any officer they had been on the verge of identifying would remain in place to serve foreign interests for years before being rotated to a different assignment. The terror of dream assassination extends beyond the act itself. When people begin to understand that they can be killed in their sleep, that there is no defense and no way to prove it happened, paranoia sets in. Sleep becomes something to fear rather than embrace. You lie in bed, exhausted, knowing you need rest, but wondering if tonight will be the night a quarry spirit finds you. This fear serves the dreaming dark's purposes beautifully, because sleep deprivation makes people easier to manipulate, less rational, more susceptible to suggestion and control. The dreaming dark would logically maintain lists of targets, prioritized by threat level and strategic importance. High-priority targets would receive immediate attention. A researcher who discovers too much about doll core's properties, a diplomat working toward genuine reconciliation between nations, an investigator getting close to exposing inspired agents. These people might have only days or weeks to live once they appear on such a list. Medium priority targets would be monitored and eliminated when convenient or when they escalate in importance. Low priority targets might live for years, watched but not actively threatened until circumstances change. The selection of method would depend on multiple factors. High-profile targets require methods that appear completely natural because their deaths will be scrutinized. Heart failure, strokes, accidents that could plausibly occur during sleep, these would be preferred. Lower-profile targets might be eliminated through the slower psychological destruction method because fewer people will notice or care about their decline. The key is ensuring that pattern recognition becomes impossible. Deaths must appear random, distributed across different causes and different time frames, never clustering in ways that might suggest a coordinated campaign. Some targets receive special attention because of their potential to expose the Dreaming Dark's operations. Members of the Kalashtar community, naturally resistant to possession and capable of detecting quarry presence, are monitored constantly, while killing them outright might draw unwanted attention from their communities, making their lives difficult through repeated nightmare attacks serves to keep them off balance and less effective as opponents. The Kalashtar understand they are targets, which actually helps the Dreaming Dark, because their warnings about quarry threats often sound like paranoid conspiracy theories to those who have not experienced such attacks personally. Dream assassination could also serve intelligence-gathering purposes. Before killing a target, a quarry might spend several nights exploring their memories and knowledge, extracting information that could be useful. This dream interrogation would leave the victim with no memory of the intrusion, because it occurs entirely in unconscious states. A diplomat might be killed after a quarry has extracted every detail of upcoming negotiations. A researcher dies after revealing the location of sensitive documents. The information flows back to Redra before the target is eliminated, maximizing the value of each assassination. The psychological impact on communities extends beyond individual deaths. When multiple people in the same organization or social circle begin dying of apparent natural causes in their sleep, even if the deaths occur over months or years, a subtle terror develops. People start to wonder if there is a pattern. They become suspicious of sleep itself. This disrupts social cohesion and organizational effectiveness far beyond the immediate loss of specific individuals. A military unit that has lost 3 officers to sudden cardiac events in 2 years becomes superstitious, less willing to take risks, less confident in their own invulnerability. Certain populations would be more vulnerable to dream assassination than others, based on quarry capabilities. Those who naturally sleep deeply or who use substances to aid sleep offer easier targets, as their mental defenses during sleep would be particularly weak. Individuals under high-stress sleep less effectively, cycling through stages more rapidly and less deeply, which oddly provides some protection because they are easier to wake and harder to trap in the vulnerable deep sleep states. The very young and very old prove most susceptible, their neural patterns less capable of resisting quarry intrusion. Magic provides some defensive options, but most people lack access to them. Certain wards can alert sleepers to dream intrusion, though not prevent it entirely. The Kalashtar have techniques for maintaining some conscious awareness during sleep, making them harder to ambush in dreams. Extremely rare magical items exist that supposedly provide protection, though verifying their effectiveness proves difficult when the threat itself remains invisible. The Church of the Silver Flame has developed some protective prayers, though their effectiveness seems inconsistent and may rely more on faith than magical properties. The most disturbing aspect of dream assassination is its scalability. A single powerful quarry could potentially kill multiple targets in a single night by moving rapidly between sleeping minds. They are not limited by physical distance or barriers. A target sleeping in a warded tower in Sharn is no safer than someone sleeping in an open field, because the quarry reaches them through the dream realm, bypassing all physical defenses. This makes protecting high-value targets extraordinarily difficult. You can surround them with guards, place them behind walls and wards, keep them under constant surveillance, and none of it matters once they close their eyes and surrender to sleep. The question that haunts those who understand this threat is simple and terrible. How many deaths attributed to natural causes over the past decades were actually assassinations? How many generals, diplomats, researchers, and officials died not from the stress of war or the weakness of age, but from deliberate murder by dream? The answer is unknowable without the ability to detect quarry involvement after the fact, and no such detection method exists. You go to sleep tonight in your own bed, in your own home, believing yourself safe behind locked doors. But if a quarry has marked you, if your name appears on their lists, those locks provide no protection at all. The last thing you will experience is whatever dream they craft for you. And whether that dream is pleasant or terrifying, it will be the last thing you ever know. Your body will be found in the morning, peaceful and still, with no evidence of the murder that occurred inside your sleeping mind. Section 4. The Trust and Other Cells. The irony would be amusing if it were not so dangerous. The Trust, Zilargo's legendary intelligence network, was created specifically to protect gnomish interests from external manipulation. Every citizen of Zilargo understands from childhood that the Trust watches, that loose lips sink ships, that secrecy and vigilance protect their small nation from larger predators. The gnomes built perhaps the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in all of Khorvaire. A network so thorough that foreign spies operating in Zilargo rarely last more than a few weeks before being identified and neutralized. And yet, this very network, designed to prevent infiltration, could itself become a target. The watchers might be watched, though whether they know it remains uncertain. The dreaming darks' approach to the Trust, if they have indeed attempted infiltration, would not begin with direct assault, but with patient study. Based on their known operational methods, for years, inspired agents would observe how the trust operated, identify its methods, map its structure, and locate its weaknesses. They would not attempt to place agents within the trust itself initially, because the gnome's counterintelligence measures are simply too good. Instead, they would focus on the trust's external contacts, the informants and assets that every intelligence service requires to function beyond its borders. A trust agent operating in Sharn relies on local informants, people who provide information about events in the city. These informants are not trust members themselves, merely paid sources or ideological supporters who believe they serve Zilargo's interests. The Dreaming Dark could identify several such informants and begin a subtle process of replacement. An informant who provided regular reports to a trust handler might suddenly stop delivering useful information, their reports becoming vague and unreliable. The trust handler, frustrated, would eventually cut ties with this asset and recruit a replacement. That replacement, if the Dreaming Dark were involved, could be a carefully positioned agent who had been groomed to seem like the perfect recruit. This new informant would deliver excellent intelligence for months, building trust and credibility. They would provide accurate information about criminal activities, political developments, and potential threats to Zilargo's interests. The trust handler would come to rely on them, to value their reports, to consider them one of their best sources in Sharn. And then, slowly, the informant might begin including additional information, carefully crafted intelligence that serves the Dreaming Dark's agenda. A report about Brellish military movements could include a small detail that was actually disinformation. A summary of political developments in the city might emphasize certain aspects while downplaying others, subtly shaping the trust's understanding of events. The beauty of this approach, from an infiltrator's perspective, is that the trust handler, running multiple informants and processing vast amounts of intelligence, has no easy way to verify every detail. Intelligence work requires making judgment calls about source reliability and information accuracy. A trusted source who has proven reliable in the past gets the benefit of the doubt. Their reports flow up the chain to analysts in Khorvaire, where they get combined with other intelligence to form a larger picture of events across Khorvaire. And if that picture is slightly distorted by carefully placed disinformation from supposedly reliable sources, the distortion might never be detected. Based on the Dreaming Dark's known scale of operations, they could have placed dozens of such compromised informants in the Trust's external network across Khorvaire. These are not Trust members, which makes them nearly impossible for the Trust to vet thoroughly, but they feed intelligence to actual Trust agents. Through them, the Dreaming Dark could shape what the Trust knows, and more importantly, what the Trust does not know. Reports about Redrin merchant activities might get downplayed or lost in the noise of hundreds of other reports. Investigations that might lead toward discovering inspired agents could hit dead ends because key informants fail to notice crucial details. The trust would remain formidable and effective at its primary mission of protecting Zilargo. But its understanding of the broader threat landscape could be systematically compromised. Beyond the trust, the Dreaming Dark operates cells across Khorvaire, each designed for specific purposes and isolated from the others. The cell structure provides operational security. If one cell is discovered and destroyed, the others continue functioning without interruption. Most cells would consist of 3 to 7 agents, usually a mix of inspired leadership with other agents in support. They operate under deep cover, sometimes for decades, building legitimate lives and careers while secretly advancing the Dreaming Dark's agenda. In Sharn, cells would logically have operated for years, patient work spanning decades. A cell leader might appear to be a successful importer of exotic goods from Zendrik, maintaining a warehouse in one of the districts. Such an import business would be entirely legitimate and quite profitable, which helps explain a comfortable lifestyle and extensive social connections. What business associates would not know is that the leader could be inspired, their body housing a quarry spirit that has possessed them for decades. Such a cell's primary mission could involve monitoring and occasionally manipulating the activities of the dragon-marked houses in Sharn. A business relationship with House Larendar would provide cover for regular contact with House members, allowing the gathering of intelligence about internal House politics and upcoming decisions. Other cell members might work as mid-level administrators in different houses, positions that provide access to shipping manifests, production schedules, and communication logs. Another member could operate a tavern frequented by house retainers and staff, collecting gossip and casual information that often proves more valuable than official reports. Over the decades, such cells could achieve modest but significant results. They might identify and report on house secrets that Riedra uses for diplomatic or economic leverage. They could sabotage attempts by houses to establish direct trade relationships with other nations, maintaining Riedra's position as the primary intermediary for certain rare goods. They might facilitate the placement of sleeper agents in different house operations across Khorvaire. And they could do all this while maintaining perfect operational security, never giving any indication that they are anything other than what they appear to be. In Flamekeep, cells would operate with a very different mission profile, focusing on religious manipulation and attempting to influence the Church of the Silver Flame's doctrine and policies. This proves particularly challenging, as the Silver Flame has genuine power against extraplanar threats. A cell leader might be someone of genuine faith who has no idea they have been subtly influenced. Years ago, during a period of spiritual crisis, they could have been contacted by what they believed to be a divine vision. The vision, actually quarry manipulation during troubled sleep, might redirect their understanding of the church's mission in subtle ways. They could now genuinely believe that the silver flame's primary concern should be internal purity rather than external threats. That the church must focus on rooting out corruption within Thrain rather than concerning itself with affairs beyond its borders. If such an individual's influence within the church hierarchy grew over 2 decades, sitting on important committees, advising bishops on matters of doctrine, and mentoring younger clergy. Through them, the dreaming dark could gradually shift church emphasis away from international concerns. Proposals to send missionary expeditions to Sarlona might be consistently blocked or defunded. Intelligence about Redrin activities that reaches church officials could get dismissed as less important than domestic issues. The church, which could potentially become a powerful opponent of the dreaming dark, might instead focus most of its energy on internal theological debates and local concerns. Such operations demonstrate the effectiveness of using subtly influenced rather than fully possessed agents for certain operations. An individual who genuinely believes in everything they do, whose faith is authentic, whose dedication is unquestionable, whose service is beyond reproach, would submit to any magical examination or interrogation without hesitation, because they would have nothing to hide. Their thoughts and motivations are their own, albeit potentially shaped by quarry manipulation, so subtle they never detected it. This makes them far more valuable than an inspired agent would be in such a position, because an inspired in the church hierarchy would face constant scrutiny and suspicion. In Canath, cells would operate among the nation's military leadership, a particularly challenging environment given Canathi traditions of discipline and loyalty testing. Such cells might use a different approach, focusing on junior officers who show potential for advancement. They would identify promising lieutenants and captains, observe their careers, and select those who demonstrate both ambition and vulnerability. Then they might arrange situations where these officers face difficult choices or moral dilemmas. Moments when someone offering support and guidance can make a lasting impression. A young captain struggling with orders he considers unjust might find sympathetic listeners in fellow officers. They could discuss philosophy, debate military ethics, and gradually shape his thinking in directions that, while not overtly serving foreign interests, create certain strategic preferences. Years later, when that captain has risen to major or colonel, he might make strategic decisions influenced by worldviews shaped during those early conversations. He might favor defensive strategies over offensive operations, prolonging conflicts rather than seeking decisive victory. He might dismiss intelligence about Redrin activities as less credible than other threats. And he would believe these decisions come from his own judgment, refined through years of experience and deep thought. The recruitment and conversion methods used to create these cells vary enormously depending on target, context, and desired outcome. Creating an inspired requires the most intensive process and carries the highest risk. A quarry must fully possess a human host, overwhelming and absorbing the original personality. This process works best with willing subjects, though the dreaming dark rarely finds those outside of Ridra. Unwilling possession requires catching the target during deep sleep in a vulnerable psychological state, then spending multiple nights breaking down mental resistance until the quarry can establish complete control. The process is traumatic for both the quarry and the host consciousness. The host's memories, personality, and sense of self must be integrated with the quarry's alien psychology. Done poorly, the result is unstable. An inspired who acts erratically, or whose cover identity breaks down under stress. Done well, the inspired can maintain their cover for decades, functioning as a seamless blend of the original human's knowledge and mannerisms with the quarry's intelligence and purpose. The dreaming dark has learned through centuries of practice that quality matters more than quantity when creating inspired. Better to have 10 stable, long-term inspired agents than 50 unstable ones who risk exposure. Creating subtly influenced agents proves less traumatic, but requires different skills. The target must be identified, studied, and analyzed to understand their psychology, their vulnerabilities, their desires, and their fears. Then the quarry begins a campaign of dream manipulation, spending weeks or months gradually reshaping the target's thoughts and beliefs. The process must be subtle enough that the target never realizes they are being manipulated. Thoughts and inclinations must feel organic, arising naturally from the target's own contemplation, rather than being imposed from outside. A researcher who has spent years studying planar mechanics might be manipulated into developing a theoretical framework that serves certain interests. During sleep, a quarry could enter their dreams and present ideas, as if the researcher thought of them independently. The next morning, the researcher wakes with new insights that seem brilliant, exactly the breakthrough they have been seeking. They develop these ideas further through their own research, never knowing that the fundamental framework was planted rather than discovered. Years later, their published work influences other scholars, spreading concepts throughout the academic community. Sleeper creation represents the most scalable recruitment method, but requires the longest-term thinking. A sleeper might be programmed and then never activated, remaining a normal citizen for their entire life. The dreaming dark would accept this inefficiency because the activated sleepers prove so valuable when needed. The programming process would involve repeated dream sessions where specific triggers and responses are encoded into the target's unconscious mind. A phrase, an image, a combination of sensory inputs. Any of these could serve as an activation trigger. When triggered, the sleeper would carry out programmed instructions that might be as simple as delivering a message or as complex as committing assassination. Then, once the task is complete, the sleeper returns to normal life with no memory of what they did. This makes them ideal for one-time operations that require someone with access to restricted locations or trusted relationships. A sleeper who works as a servant in a noble's household could poison their employer during a programmed activation, then continue working in the household afterward with no conscious knowledge of their crime. The dreaming dark also operates what could be called cultivation programs, long-term efforts to shape the development of entire organizations or communities. In Khorvaire University, such a program might run for decades, subtly influencing academic curricula and research priorities. Several professors could be agents, genuinely believing in their scholarly pursuits, while unknowingly steering their fields away from topics that might threaten the dreaming dark. Students who graduate from Khorvaire go on to careers throughout Khorvaire, carrying with them academic frameworks and assumptions that were carefully crafted to limit their ability to understand the true nature of certain threats. Similar cultivation programs could operate in merchant guilds, military academies, and artistic communities. The goal would not be direct control, but rather shaping the intellectual and cultural environment so that certain ideas seem natural while others appear radical or unlikely. A generation raised on history books written by influenced scholars grows up with subtle misconceptions about the age of giants, about Dal Quor's properties, about the relationship between dreams and reality. These misconceptions become so embedded in the culture that correcting them requires not just presenting facts, but overcoming deeply held assumptions about how the world works. The financial networks that support all these operations span multiple legitimate businesses and trade routes. Redran merchants moving goods through Khorvaire provide both cover and funding for dreaming dark activities. A percentage of profits from legitimate trade gets diverted to support agents, purchase information, and finance operations. The money flows through so many transactions and exchanges that tracing it back to its source becomes effectively impossible. Funding that originated in Redra arrives through multiple trading companies, banks, and dragon-marked house transfers. On paper, every transaction appears completely normal and legal. Communication between cells and with handlers in Redra occurs through multiple channels, each suited to different types of information and security requirements. Urgent intelligence travels through dream sendings, direct mind-to-mind communication during sleep that leaves no physical trace. Regular reports go through encoded messages hidden in legitimate correspondence, using sophisticated ciphers that appear to be normal business or personal letters. Physical meetings between agents happen rarely and only when absolutely necessary, usually arranged to seem like chance encounters in public spaces. The operational patience demonstrated by these cells reflects millennia of quarry experience. They do not rush, do not take unnecessary risks, and accept that progress might be measured in years or decades rather than months. Cells operating for decades achieve objectives that would have been impossible through short-term operations. Cells that spend 20 years shaping institutional policy do work that is only now bearing significant fruit. This patience serves them well, because rushing operations increases the risk of exposure, and exposure of any significant dreaming dark operation would alert Khorvaire to the threat and potentially unite the nations against a common enemy. The cells also maintain strict operational discipline, following protocols that minimize risk and maximize effectiveness. Agents do not know more than they need to know about other operations. A member of one cell has no idea that other cells exist in different cities. If captured and interrogated, they can reveal only their own cell's activities, limiting the damage. This compartmentalization makes coordinating large operations more difficult. But security takes precedence over convenience. The most successful cells are those that become completely integrated into their cover communities. Agents who genuinely participate in local life, who form real friendships, who contribute to their communities. These agents achieve a depth of cover that makes detection nearly impossible. They are not pretending to be merchants or priests or officers. They truly are those things, living those lives authentically while also serving the dreaming dark. This dual existence requires a particular kind of psychological stability and commitment that makes inspired and deeply conditioned agents the preferred operatives for long-term deep cover operations. You walk past them every day, these agents potentially embedded in the fabric of Khorvaire's society. The merchant who sold you supplies for your journey, the priest who blessed your marriage, the officer who inspected your travel papers, any of them could be agents, going about their normal lives while secretly advancing an agenda that most of Khorvaire does not even know exists. And the terrifying thing is not that they might exist, but that if they are so deeply embedded, so carefully placed, and so patient in their work, exposing them might prove impossible without destroying the very institutions and communities they have infiltrated. Section 5. What the dreaming dark ultimately wants. The question that drives everything, that explains every manipulation and every murder, comes down to a single existential terror that the quarry have lived with for thousands of years. Dal Khor, the region of dreams, is currently separated from the material plane of Eberron. The plane exists, distant and unreachable, except through the medium of mortal dreams. The quarry can touch sleeping minds, possess vulnerable hosts, and influence events across the world. But they cannot physically manifest on Eberron. They cannot invade, cannot conquer, cannot exist independently of mortal hosts, and more importantly, more terrifyingly for them, they remain vulnerable to something that could destroy their entire civilization in an instant. The turning of the age. You need to understand what happened last time to grasp why the Dreaming Dark operates with such desperate, methodical patience. Tens of thousands of years ago, estimates ranging from 39 to 40,000 years before the present day. In the previous age of the world, Dal Quor was connected to Eberron in a fundamentally different way. The quarry of that era were different from those that exist now. That age ended when the plane's alignment with Eberron shifted during a cosmic event called the Turning. When Dal Quor's nature fundamentally changed, the entire quarry civilization died, every single one. The plane itself survived, but its inhabitants were completely annihilated, their existence erased in a moment of cosmic transformation. From the ashes of that extinction, new quarry emerged, the current generation that rules Dal Quor and possesses the inspired of Ridra. These quarry are not the descendants or survivors of the previous generation. They are entirely new beings who arose in the transformed plane. Though how much knowledge or memory they inherited from their predecessors remains a matter of scholarly debate. What is known is that they understand, with absolute certainty backed by whatever knowledge they possess, that another turning will eventually occur. The planes move in cycles, ages turn, and when the next turning comes, they face the same fate as their predecessors. This is not mere death as mortals understand it. When a quarry is destroyed on the material plane, it reforms in Dal Quor after a period of time, recovering and returning. But when the turning occurs, based on what happened to the previous quarry civilization, there would be no reformation, no resurrection, no continuation. The entire species simply ceases to exist, replaced by whatever new form of quarry emerges in the transformed plane. Every individual quarry, every personality and consciousness faces not just death, but complete ontological annihilation. This knowledge creates a level of existential dread that most mortals cannot truly comprehend. Imagine knowing that at some point in the future, perhaps in 1,000 years or perhaps sooner, you and everyone you have ever known will simply stop existing, not dying and moving to an afterlife, not being reborn, but ceasing to be in every possible sense. The Dreaming Dark was formed as a direct response to this terror, a conspiracy of the most powerful quarry dedicated to a single goal: prevent the turning by any means necessary. Their research and calculations, developed over thousands of years, and drawing on whatever knowledge survived from the previous quarry civilization, have led them to certain conclusions about how to achieve this goal. The turning is triggered by cosmic alignments and planar mechanics that even the quarry do not fully understand, but they have identified factors that influence when and how it occurs. The current separation of Dal Quor from close alignment with the material plane could be seen as protective. Therefore, based on their apparent strategy, the first and most critical goal would be to keep Dal Quor separated from Eberron, to maintain the current state of disconnection indefinitely. This explains why the Dreaming Dark views the existence of Khorvaire as simultaneously an opportunity and a threat. Opportunity, because the mortal population provides hosts for possession and tools for manipulation. Threat, because mortal civilization, if allowed to develop unchecked, could eventually create the magical and technological capability to force planar reconnection. During the height of Galifar, when the Empire's magical might reached its peak, researchers came close to understanding advanced planar mechanics. Based on the Dreaming Dark's known interference patterns, they would have worked for decades to sabotage such research, to eliminate the most brilliant minds working in relevant fields, and to ensure that crucial knowledge was lost or suppressed. The giants of ancient Zendrik possessed such knowledge. Their civilization, at its height tens of thousands of years ago, commanded magic that modern Khorvaire can barely imagine. They understood planar mechanics intimately, created artifacts of tremendous power, and potentially achieved capabilities regarding planar manipulation that would concern any entity dependent on the current planar arrangement. When the giant civilization fell, destroyed by the dragons of Arganesson through devastating magical assault, whatever the quarry's involvement or awareness, the destruction of that accumulated knowledge would have served their interests. Now, thousands of years later, Khorvaire slowly rebuilds understanding that ancient civilizations once possessed. Universities research planar theory. The dragon-marked houses experiment with magical transportation. Artificers develop new applications of magic that push the boundaries of what is considered possible. Every advance, every discovery, every brilliant innovation brings Khorvaire one tiny step closer to potentially affecting planar alignments. And so the Dreaming Dark, if their goal is as suspected, must suppress that progress without making their suppression obvious enough to reveal their true agenda. This provides context for why they would have prolonged the last war if they had the capability. A civilization at war focuses on immediate military applications of magic rather than theoretical research. Resources go to weapons rather than libraries. The brightest minds work on tactical problems rather than fundamental questions about the nature of reality. 100 years of warfare set back Khorvaire's magical and scientific development by potentially centuries. Knowledge was destroyed, researchers died, universities closed, and entire fields of study were abandoned as irrelevant to the survival needs of nations at war. But warfare alone cannot permanently suppress advancement. Eventually, peace comes. Eventually, reconstruction begins. And with it comes renewed research and discovery. This suggests why the Dreaming Dark would need Khorvaire to remain divided and suspicious, even in peacetime. United Nations pool resources and knowledge, creating research programs that far exceed what any single nation can achieve. A united Khorvaire might establish a continental university system where the best minds collaborate freely. They might fund massive research initiatives into planar mechanics, seeking to understand the morning or to develop better teleportation magic. Any of these endeavors might stumble upon knowledge that threatens the quarry's continued existence. Divided nations, however, hoard knowledge and compete rather than cooperate. Brellin's researchers work in isolation from Onder's, duplicating efforts and wasting resources. Military secrets prevent the sharing of magical innovations. Economic competition leads houses to suppress discoveries that might benefit rivals. This inefficiency serves the dreaming dark perfectly, because inefficiency slows the overall rate of advancement and makes breakthrough discoveries less likely. The Kalashtar represent a unique threat to this agenda, because they are quarry spirits who rebelled against the dreaming dark and bonded with willing human hosts in Adar. These rebel quarry carry knowledge about Dal Kor's true nature and the dreaming dark's plans. They actively work to expose quarry infiltration and to warn Khorvaire about the danger. The dreaming dark has spent centuries trying to exterminate the Kalashtar, conducting systematic campaigns in Adar and assassination programs wherever Kalashtar appear beyond their mountain refuges. But the Kalashtar prove frustratingly resilient. Their dual nature, human and quarry combined, gives them natural resistance to possession and manipulation. They can detect inspired through psychic senses that normal humans lack, and when they speak about the dreaming dark's infiltration, they speak from direct knowledge rather than speculation. This makes them the single most dangerous population group to quarry interests, and eliminating them has been a priority for generations. The dreaming dark's operations in Khorvaire all serve the ultimate goal of maintaining the status quo indefinitely. They do not want to conquer Khorvaire directly, because overt conquest would unite resistance and draw attention from powers like Arganessen. The dragons, ancient and powerful, have destroyed civilizations before when those civilizations grew too threatening. The quarry would have learned from history what the dragons did to the giant empire, and they would have no desire to face similar treatment. Subtle control, invisible influence. These tactics keep them below the threshold that might trigger draconic intervention. The Church of the Silver Flame presents another complication. The Silver Flame, whatever its true nature, has demonstrated genuine power against extraplanar threats. Quarry who attempt to possess flame-touched individuals often find their power rebuffed or destroyed. The Church's paladins and clerics can detect and combat possession when they know to look for it. If the Church ever became fully aware of the scope of quarry infiltration, if they mobilized their considerable resources and influence to combat the dreaming dark, they could potentially expose the entire operation and unite Khorvaire against the threat. This explains why cells would work diligently to keep the Church focused inward. A Church concerned with domestic purity and theological debates is a church that is not investigating Redran activities or developing countermeasures against dream manipulation. The Dreaming Dark would prefer to eliminate the church entirely, but that is not currently feasible. Instead, they work to neutralize it as a threat through misdirection and internal division. The dragon-marked houses pose a different kind of challenge. Their economic power and magical capabilities make them too valuable to destroy and too dangerous to ignore. The Dreaming Dark appears to have chosen a strategy of partial infiltration and economic dependence. Houses that profit from trade with Redra have incentives not to investigate too closely into their trading partners' activities. Houses that have accepted agents into positions of minor authority find themselves slowly compromised without realizing it. And houses that remain independent face economic competition from those that cooperate, creating pressure to accommodate Redran interests. The ultimate endgame that the Dreaming Dark envisions, based on their apparent actions, is not conquest, but stasis. They would want Khorvaire to remain roughly as it is now, divided into competing nations that maintain enough prosperity to be useful, but never achieve the unity and focus necessary to pose an existential threat. They would want populations that are comfortable enough not to rebel, but insecure enough to be manipulated through fear. They would want technological and magical advancement to continue at a controlled pace, enough to maintain civilization, but not enough to break through into dangerous territory. In essence, they would want a carefully managed civilization that exists primarily to serve as a population of potential hosts and as a buffer between Redra and external threats. Khorvaire, in this vision, becomes a farm where the Dreaming Dark cultivates useful mortals, harvests intelligence and resources, and maintains enough instability to prevent unity without causing complete collapse. The nations would remain independent and proud, never realizing they are being subtly guided along paths that serve interests they do not even know exist. The fear and paranoia that the Dreaming Dark cultivates serve multiple purposes. Populations afraid of external threats are easier to manipulate toward conflict. Citizens who suspect infiltration and conspiracy become paralyzed by indecision, unable to trust their own institutions enough to take coordinated action. Leaders who fear assassination in their sleep become cautious and conservative, avoiding risks that might benefit their nations, but also might make them targets. This ambient fear creates a social environment where the Dreaming Dark can operate with reduced risk of exposure. But this strategy contains inherent contradictions and weaknesses. The more successful the Dreaming Dark becomes at maintaining division and suppressing advancement, the more fragile the entire system becomes. A civilization kept artificially weak and divided might collapse entirely if faced with external pressures beyond the quarry's control. The morning demonstrated this vulnerability. Whatever caused the destruction of Sire and the dreaming dark apparently does not know. It represented a catastrophic event that they could not predict or prevent. If similar disasters occur elsewhere, if other threats emerge that require united response, Khorvaire might fracture beyond any ability to maintain useful stability. The dreaming dark also faces the constant challenge of managing their own agents. Inspired who spend decades in mortal forms sometimes develop attachments and perspectives that conflict with their original mission. As the human personality they absorbed remains part of them, subtly influenced agents might break free of their conditioning if exposed to the right stimuli or information. Sleepers might activate prematurely or fail to activate when needed. Each agent represents a potential point of failure, and the network's complexity creates multiplicative risks. There is also the fundamental problem that the quarry's existence depends on mortal dreams. Yet they work constantly to create conditions that disrupt healthy sleep and dreaming. Or trauma, chronic stress, fear of dream invasion. All of these factors reduce the quality and quantity of mortal dreaming. If pushed too far, if mortal populations become too damaged psychologically, the very medium through which quarry operate might degrade. They must balance their need to manipulate mortals against their dependence on those same mortals, maintaining some baseline of psychological health. The prophecies that might guide the dreaming dark's planning are themselves problematic. The draconic prophecy, studied by dragons and scholars for millennia, contains signs and omens that could predict when cosmic changes like a turning will occur. But prophecies are notoriously difficult to interpret, and multiple interpretations often seem equally valid. The dreaming dark would employ their own prophets and seers, inspired who specialize in divination and pattern recognition. But even they cannot be certain about what the prophecies truly mean. They make their plans based on best guesses and probabilities, knowing that they might be wrong about timing or methods. Some within the dreaming dark may have begun to question whether preventing the turning is even possible. The cosmic forces that drive such events operate on scales that dwarf even quarry power. Perhaps their efforts merely delay the inevitable, buying time but not truly changing the outcome. But questioning the mission is dangerous, because if the dreaming dark's purpose is futile, then everything they have done, all the deaths and manipulations and violations, becomes meaningless. So they continue, driven by existential terror and the desperate hope that they can somehow cheat fate. The question that you must consider as you contemplate the scope of this shadow war is what happens if the dreaming dark succeeds completely. If Khorvaire remains divided and controlled for centuries, if advancement is suppressed, if the turning is delayed or prevented, what does victory look like? It would look like an entire civilization trapped in artificial stasis, never reaching its full potential, forever manipulated by invisible puppet masters who care nothing for mortal flourishing or freedom. It would look like generations born into a world designed to keep them weak and divided, where every attempt at unity or progress faces secret sabotage. But if the dreaming dark fails, if their network is exposed, if Khorvaire unites to resist them, then they face potential extinction. Not just defeat or loss of influence, but the possibility that united mortal efforts might actually force the turning they fear, bringing about the ontological annihilation of their entire species. This creates a desperate, zero-sum game where compromise seems impossible, and the stakes could not be higher. You live in this world now, in the fragile peace after the last war, walking streets where agents watch and sleep might bring death. The shadow war continues every night, in every dream, in every quiet moment when consciousness fades and vulnerability opens. The dreaming dark does not rest, because they are driven by fear more profound than any mortal can truly understand. They are the dying desperate to survive, the condemned seeking to escape their fate, the terrified willing to commit any atrocity if it might buy them more time before the darkness comes. And until Khorvaire understands the true scope of the threat, until nations set aside their differences and unite against this invisible enemy, until someone finds a way to detect and eliminate the infiltration that has wormed its way into every level of society, the shadow war will continue. The dreaming dark will keep working toward their vision of controlled stasis, one manipulation at a time, one death at a time, one day at a time, forever if they can manage it. Because for them, there is no alternative. They win or they cease to exist, and they will do absolutely anything to avoid that second option. If you have found value in this deep exploration of the dreaming darks, shadow war across Khorvaire, if you want to continue discovering the hidden lore and forgotten secrets of the worlds we explore together, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on this video. Your support allows us to keep diving into these complex topics, to spend the time researching and crafting the comprehensive examinations that these subjects deserve. There is so much more to explore, so many more stories waiting in the shadows. Thank you for listening, and may your dreams remain your own.